The door creaked open with a slow, drawn-out groan that didn't match the rhythm of the morning rush. The scent of frying bacon, fresh coffee, and worn-out dreams filled the air of the small-town diner. Regulars sat in their usual booths, heads bent over greasy menus they already knew by heart. Laughter from a pair of mechanics at the corner booth blended with the clink of cutlery and the soft hum of a jukebox playing a forgotten Elvis tune. It was another ordinary Tuesday morning at Gracie's diner. Then he walked in. At first, no one noticed. The old man was quiet, almost invisible, his presence more like a breeze than a storm. He wore a faded brown overcoat, frayed at the cuffs, a wool cap pulled low over his silvery hair. His shoes were well worn, leather cracked, soles whispering against the checkered floor. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the edge of the door, steadying himself. Eyes that held lifetimes' worth of sorrow scanned the diner, landing on the one empty stool at the counter. Slowly, almost cautiously, he made his way to it and sat down, shoulders hunched as though the weight of the world rested on his back. Emily saw him. She always saw them, the ones who slipped through the cracks. While most servers learned to focus on the loud, the big tippers, the regulars who kept the coffee flowing, Emily had a habit of spotting the quiet ones. Maybe it was because she'd grown up in a trailer with cupboards that sometimes held more dust than food. Or maybe it was because she'd watched her own father count nickels at a gas station counter, choosing between bread and fuel. Either way, when the old man sat down, Emily was already moving. "Morning," she said with a warm, practiced smile, the kind that made people feel seen. "Cold out there today?" The man looked up at her. His eyes were pale blue, glassy, and deeply set beneath bushy brows. He nodded slowly. "It is," he said, voice low and gravelly. "It's been cold for a long time." Emily blinked at the odd phrasing but didn't press. She'd learned long ago that people came to the diner not just for eggs and toast, but for space, to breathe, to think, to heal. She slid a menu in front of him, but he didn't touch it. "Just a coffee," he said. "Black, please." "You got it." She walked back to the coffee machine and poured a fresh cup, watching him out of the corner of her eye. He reached into his coat pocket, fingers moving slowly, gingerly. When she returned and set the steaming mug in front of him, he was counting coins, carefully, meticulously. A few quarters, a dime, some nickels. He looked up at her with a quiet apology already in his expression. I think I'm short," he said, voice almost inaudible. "By a dime, maybe two." Emily glanced at the small pile of change, and he was right, just under the cost of a cup of coffee. But she didn't flinch. "Don't worry about it," she said gently, sweeping the coins into her apron pocket without a second thought. "It's on me today." The old man stared at her for a long moment, blinking slowly, as if trying to understand the words. His eyes didn't leave her face. She began to feel a little self-conscious under the weight of his gaze, but she held his look with a soft smile. "You're kind," he said finally. "That's rare." "It shouldn't be," she replied. "Besides, everyone deserves a hot cup of coffee on a cold morning." He nodded, but said nothing more. He wrapped his hands around the cup, letting the warmth seep into his bones. For several minutes, he sat in silence, occasionally taking a sip, mostly just staring into the dark swirl of the coffee as if searching for something inside it. Emily returned to her duties, taking orders, delivering plates, joking with the regulars. But every few minutes, her eyes flicked back to the old man. There was something about him, something not quite right. He didn't seem drunk or sick, just out of place. He carried himself like a man who had been important once, maybe decades ago, but who had lost the map back to where he belonged. The breakfast crowd began to thin. The laughter died down. The jukebox song ended, replaced by silence and the occasional clatter of silverware. The old man finished his coffee, placed the empty cup carefully back on its saucer and stood up. Emily glanced over just in time to catch his wobble. She rushed forward instinctively, steadying him by the elbow. "Are you okay?" He gave her a weak smile. "Just a little stiff," he muttered. "Happens when your knees are older than most buildings," she chuckled softly. "Well, take your time." "No rush." He patted her hand gently before letting go. "You've been very kind," he said again. "You remind me of someone I once knew. A long time ago. Hope they were nice," she said playfully. "They were," he whispered, almost too softly to hear. Too nice for this world. She didn't know what to say to that. Before she could respond, he turned and slowly made his way to the door. Just as quietly as he had arrived, he slipped out into the grey morning mist. Emily stood there for a moment longer, watching the empty space he'd left behind. Something about the encounter clung to her skin, like the scent of rain before a storm. She didn't know his name. She didn't know where he came from. But there was a heaviness in the air that hadn't been there before. Like a secret had just brushed past her and whispered, "Remember me." She returned to wiping down the counter, but her mind stayed with him. Who was he? Why did his eyes seem both full and hollow at the same time? And why did it feel like something much bigger had just happened, something she couldn't quite name? At that moment, Emily had no way of knowing that her simple act of kindness would echo far beyond that quiet morning. She had just opened the door to a story that would change her life forever. The next morning arrived with the usual rhythm of routine. Sunlight spilled through the diner's windows in warm streaks. Steam danced from coffee pots, and Emily tied her apron with the casual grace of repetition. The bell above the door jingled constantly with regulars walking in and out, each greeting her with sleepy smiles and small talk. On the surface, it was just another day. But in the back of her mind, the old man lingered like a whisper she couldn't quite forget. She hadn't told anyone about him. Not her manager. Not her co-workers. It had just seemed like a small moment, a quiet exchange. But it had stayed with her through the night, through her shift dreams and morning yawns. The way he looked at her, the gentleness in his voice. It haunted her in a strangely peaceful way. The morning rush was beginning to die down when the black car pulled up. It didn't belong there. In a town where most people drove dusty pickups or 10-year-old sedans, this vehicle was too sleek, too polished, too foreign. A luxury sedan, pitch black, its surface gleaming in the sunlight like a shadow wrapped in chrome. It idled at the curb for a long moment, as if watching the diner. Emily noticed it from the counter and felt a flicker of unease pinch the back of her neck. The car door opened with a smooth hiss, and a tall man stepped out. He wore a dark-tailored suit, crisp white shirt, no tie. His hair was neatly combed, his face clean-shaven, and his posture too perfect to belong to anyone from around here. He didn't pause to admire the scenery or fumble with his phone. He walked straight into the diner like a man with a mission. The bell jingled as he entered. Conversations dulled. A few customers turned to look, sensing the shift in the air. He scanned the room like someone used to finding what he needed quickly. Emily approached, notebook in hand, more out of habit than comfort. "Morning. Table for one?" The man looked at her, then at the small gold name tag pinned above her heart. "You're Emily," he said, not a question but a confirmation. She blinked. Yes." He nodded slightly, like checking off a mental list. "Good. I'm here on behalf of Mr. Langston. He asked me to find you." Her brow furrowed. "Mr. Langston?" The man reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the counter with gloved fingers. Emily picked it up slowly. Warren Langston, Langston Global Ventures. She turned the card over. Nothing else. Just those embossed letters, elegant, expensive. The name meant nothing to her, but something about it made her heart beat faster. "I'm sorry," she said, setting the card down carefully. "I think there's been some mistake." "I don't know any Mr. Langston." "Yes," the man said calmly, "you do. You served him coffee yesterday morning. An older gentleman, worn coat, counted coins on your counter." Emily's breath caught. "The old man?" she asked, half whispering. He nodded. That was Mr. Langston. She couldn't stop staring at him. Her brain scrambled to reconcile the two images. The soft-spoken, shivering man who looked like he had nowhere to go, and the name on the gold card that screamed money and power. "I don't understand," she murmured. "He didn't look like he doesn't like to be recognized," the man interrupted, polite but firm. "He prefers to meet people as they are, without pretense." Without expectation, Emily shook her head, still processing. Why would he come here? Why, me? The man leaned in just slightly. Because he's looking for someone. Not someone with a resume or a portfolio. Someone real. She glanced down at the business card again, her fingers tracing the engraved letters. I don't get it. What does he want with me? He wants to see you, the man said. Today, if you're willing. Emily hesitated. Her shift didn't end for another 3 hours. She hadn't even taken her lunch break. She thought about the old man's face, his eyes, how they had studied her with a strange, quiet intensity. She remembered his words. You're kind. That's rare. It was ridiculous. This whole thing was surreal, and yet she felt herself nodding. The man pulled out a folded slip of paper from his jacket. Here's the address. Be there before noon. You won't be asked to wait. She took the paper, unfolded it slowly. It wasn't an address she recognized. Somewhere on the edge of town, up in the hills where the road curved away into trees and money and mystery. The man offered her a final nod. He's expecting you. Don't be late. Then he turned, just as calm and precise, and walked out. The car swallowed him like a shadow returning to its source. A second later it pulled away, disappearing down the road. Emily stood there for a long time, still holding the address in her hand, the card resting on the counter beside her, like proof that she hadn't imagined it all. The diner returned to its rhythm around her, but everything felt off-kilter now, like she was in a different scene from everyone else. She told her manager she had to leave early. For the first time in years, she used the word urgent. He didn't argue, just raised an eyebrow and told her to go find out whatever it was that had her looking so shaken. Emily changed out of her apron, tucked the card and address into her purse, and stepped outside. The sun had risen a little higher, casting golden light on the sleepy town. But something had changed. As she started her car and pulled out onto the main road, her hands were shaking. Not from fear exactly, more like anticipation, like standing at the edge of something unknown. Just before you take the leap, she had no idea what she would find at that address, but something told her the coffee she gave away yesterday had started a chain of events far bigger than she could imagine, and she wasn't just driving toward a man. She was driving toward a truth that had been waiting for her all along. The road twisted like a ribbon through the hills, winding past tall pines and sprawling estates hidden behind stone walls and iron gates. Emily's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles pale. The directions had led her out of town, far beyond the neighborhood she knew, into a world where silence had weight and the air itself seemed laced with secrets. Her little car felt out of place on the smooth private road, lined with manicured hedges and security cameras tucked beneath flowering vines. She reached the gate, tall, black, imposing. It opened without her touching a thing, no intercom, no guard. It simply recognized her or expected her. Either way, the creak of the gate swinging inward sent a shiver through her spine. The driveway curved uphill, flanked by towering trees, whose branches arched above like a cathedral ceiling. At the top, it opened into a clearing, and there it was, a mansion, not the gaudy kind with golden fountains and sprawling statues. This one was older, quieter, draped in ivy and thyme. It looked like it had been built by hands that respected wood and stone, hands that believed in roots. Windows stretched tall across the facade, catching the sun like watchful eyes. The front door was carved, dark and heavy. As she stepped out of the car, the only sound was the crunch of gravel underfoot and the faintest call of a bird in the distance. Before she could knock, the door opened. An elderly man stood inside, not the suited messenger from earlier, but another, much older. Dressed in a dark vest and white gloves, he nodded solemnly. "Miss Emily, he's waiting for you." She followed him down a long hallway. The walls were lined with photographs in gilded frames, black and white portraits of somber men, women in elegant dresses, children frozen mid-laughter. There were paintings, too, landscapes, ships at sea, cities from eras gone by. But it wasn't just art. The air itself felt like it held stories, like every floorboard had a memory beneath it. The old man led her to a study. Massive windows lined the far wall, opening to a view of distant hills and forest below. Bookshelves covered the other three walls, packed tight with leather-bound volumes, aged spines and yellowing pages. A fireplace crackled quietly, the scent of cedar and tobacco weaving through the room like a spell, and in the center of it all, he sat, the same man from the diner, but not the same. Gone was the worn coat and trembling hands. He wore a tailored sweater now, a navy scarf draped lightly across his shoulders. His posture was stronger, his presence more commanding, but it was unmistakably him. The same eyes, the same calm gravity. He looked up from his coffee and smiled. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. Emily stood frozen just inside the doorway. "You're Mr. Langston?" He nodded once. "I am. And you're Emily, the waitress who saw me yesterday." "The only one who saw me." She moved closer, heart pounding. "Why pretend to be someone else?" He motioned for her to sit. "Because when you're known, you're never sure if you're being seen for who you are, or for what you own." She hesitated, then took the chair across from him. "So this was the test?" "In a way," he said, sipping his coffee. "But not for you." "For me," Emily frowned. "I don't understand." Mr. Langston set down the cup. "I've built a life of deals, acquisitions, strategies. I've made more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. But lately, I've been wondering if I've lost something along the way. Something human, something real." He leaned back slightly, studying her. "You reminded me what that looked like." Emily shifted in her seat. "All I did was pay for your coffee," he smiled. "Yes, and you didn't ask for anything in return. You didn't look at me with pity. You looked at me with kindness." A silence settled between them, filled only by the crackling fire and the faint ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Then he reached for a folder on the desk beside him and slid it across the table. Emily opened it slowly. Her eyes moved across the pages. One was a letter offering her a full scholarship to any university of her choosing. Another offered her a paid internship at Langston Global Ventures. But it was the third document that made her hands tremble, the deed to Gracie's diner. She looked up at him, breath caught in her throat. What is this?" "A gift," he said simply. "And a responsibility." "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why would you give me all this?" "Because that diner saved my life once," he said, his voice softer now. "Many years ago. I was a boy with nothing but hunger and hurt. A woman behind that counter fed me, listened to me, believed in me when no one else did." He paused, then pulled out an old photograph from a drawer. He handed it to her. Emily stared at it, a black and white image of a young woman in a waitress uniform, laughing with a child seated at the counter. "That was my mother," he said. "She worked at Gracie's before it even had a name. She died before I ever made my first million. But I never forgot her. And yesterday, when you spoke to me, you sounded just like her." Tears stung the corners of Emily's eyes. She touched the photo gently, as though afraid it would vanish. "You don't have to accept," he said. "You can walk away. But if you do, I need you to know this was never about charity. It's about trust, about legacy." He looked at her with the full weight of decades in his eyes. "Will you keep that kindness alive? Not for me, but for the people who walk in with empty pockets and silent stories. The ones who just need to be seen." Emily looked down at the folder, then back at the man who had once counted coins at her counter. She felt like she was standing at a crossroads, her past and future braided together in ways she hadn't expected. And yet, it all felt right. She closed the folder slowly, but before she could speak, Mr. Langston added, almost as an afterthought, "There's one last thing I haven't told anyone in 20 years. Her eyes locked on his. "What is it?" she asked, his lips pressed into a thin line. The firelight reflected in his eyes, flickering like the past itself, was rising from the ashes, and what he said next would change everything. He leaned forward in his chair, the flames from the fireplace casting a warm orange glow across his face. For a long moment, Mr. Langston didn't speak. His fingers gently ran over the photo of his mother on the desk, like it was a fragile piece of his past he was afraid might crumble. His eyes, now distant, were somewhere far beyond the walls of that quiet room. "When I was 7, he began softly. I stole a piece of bread, Emily blinked, startled, not because of the act itself, but because of the raw honesty in his voice. He wasn't telling a story. He was reliving a wound. I was hungry, he said. Not in the way people joke about when they skip breakfast. I mean hungry, in the way that your bones ache, your stomach clenches, and you start to feel like maybe you could fade away and no one would notice. My mother worked double shifts at the diner. She'd slip leftovers into napkins and bring them home in her purse. But that week she was sick, real sick, fever, coughing. She couldn't get out of bed. He paused, swallowed hard. There was no food left, nothing. I hadn't eaten in 2 days. So I walked down to the corner store. I remember how warm it felt inside, how the bell jingled above the door. The bread was right there on the shelf. I told myself I'd pay for it later, that I'd come back and explain. But I knew better. I took it, ran. His voice wavered and he smiled bitterly. The store owner caught me. A man named Mr. Nolan. I was sure I was going to jail. But instead of calling the cops, he marched me all the way to the diner, right in front of my mother. I'll never forget how she looked at me, disappointed, but not angry, just heartbroken. She apologized to him like she'd committed the crime herself. Then after he left, she sat me down and said something I never forgot. He looked at Emily now, his eyes sharp, glistening. She said, Warren, this world might not give you anything, but you still get to decide what kind of man you're going to be. Emily sat frozen, breath shallow, as if any sound might break the spell of the story. That was the last week I had with her, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She died 2 nights later, pneumonia. She never went to a doctor because we couldn't afford it. I buried her with her apron folded neatly on her chest. She always said it was her armor. He looked away, blinking quickly. I ended up in the system, bounced around. But I never forgot what she said. I worked, scraped, borrowed, built. I rose, fell, rose again. Made my first million by 35. Became a billionaire by 48. But I didn't go back. Not to the diner. Not to the town. Not until last year. Emily's voice came softly. Why not? Because I was ashamed, he admitted. Not of what I'd done, but of what I hadn't. I hadn't kept her memory alive the way I promised I would. I let the world shape me into a man of walls and numbers. Until something broke. What broke? My heart, he said plainly. And when it did, I found myself wondering if I could start over, not financially, but emotionally. What would I change? He gestured around the room. I have everything, but I've never felt more alone. So I went back to that diner yesterday, hoping maybe to feel something again. And then you appeared, and you looked at me not like a lost cause, not like a sad old man, but like someone worth offering kindness to. Emily sat still for a long time, overwhelmed by the weight of his confession. The grandeur of the room around her, the mansion, the money, all of it melted away in the face of this truth. She reached across the table and gently placed her hand over his. You honored her, she said, by surviving, by remembering, and now, by giving. Mr. Langston's shoulders softened, his breath easing as if her words had reached something deeply buried. He smiled gently. I didn't bring you here to reward you. I brought you here to ask you something. Emily looked at him, heart pounding again. I want to give you the diner, he said. Not just the building, the soul of it. I want you to protect the kind of place where someone like me, back then, could walk in and feel human. Could be treated with dignity when the world has taken everything else. She swallowed hard. I've never run a business before. You'll learn, he said simply. I'll make sure you're trained, connected, supported, but the heart, the spirit of it, that's already in you. I saw it. She looked down at the deed in the folder again, then back at the photograph of his mother, her laugh frozen in black and white, radiant and wild. Emily thought about all the people who came into the diner, the lonely, the hurried, the forgotten, and how small acts, a warm smile, a hot meal, a kind word, could shift the weight of someone's entire day. She looked up at him. Then let's do it, she said. Let's make it more than a place to eat. Let's make it a place to belong. Mr. Langston's eyes closed briefly, relief etched in every line of his face. Thank you, he whispered. You've just given me something I've been searching for longer than I realized. They both stood. The fire crackled behind them. Outside, the sun had begun to dip toward the horizon, casting the hills in golden light. As Emily walked out of the study, the folder in her hands, she felt a strange sensation rise in her chest. Not fear, not pride, but purpose. She wasn't leaving with just paperwork. She was walking out with a story entrusted to her, a legacy born from hunger, loss, hope, and second chances. And behind her, in the warmth of the study, a billionaire who had once been a starving boy finally closed a chapter that had waited decades to end. All because a waitress paid for a cup of coffee without knowing who was drinking it.